Well, it's time to kick off my thoughts on the individual cars in GT7 1.46. What better place to start than with the standout for many of us, certainly the car which you can do the most to out of the three. In fact, kind of ironically, not only can you modify this one, whereas with the other two you can barely do anything, in terms of upgrades at least, with this one it has some weird upgrades. For one thing, they are very generous when it comes to power on this car. The one that you can see me driving here is fully built, so it's up around, I think it was 920 horsepower, something like that. Huge amount of torque as well. You can bore and stroke it out to like a 7.6, 7.7, and in terms of performance, of course, it just rampantly wheel spins. You'll see me here in the video wheel spinning up around 150 miles an hour, which is hilarious, but at the same time you can also do some, and I alluded to this in my review of the update, quite interesting visual upgrades to it as well. It's got a huge chin splitter, which isn't really too surprising. You can pretty much do that with all of these, but the rear wing is kind of weird. You can put that very drag racing style low slung spoiler sticking out the back, which looks pretty cool, but I don't know, I wouldn't necessarily say it's quite quick enough to justify that. That being said though, it is a great car to have back because it's such an icon, as some pointed out, not quite as legendary necessarily as something like a Boss Mustang or a Charger, but definitely a fantastic muscle car in its own right. It's big, it's heavy, it's powerful, it's got that great 454 cubic inch engine, which is around 7.5 litre as standard, and a lot of horsepower, 450 foot-pounds of torque. Of course it is fairly heavy, but even then, it's not necessarily as heavy as you might think. 1,762 kilos is lighter than a number of other muscle cars in real life in particular, but also even in the game. If I recall correctly, I'm pretty sure the Superbird, for example, weighs quite a bit more than that. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure it does, closer to 2 tons, I think. In terms of price, it's actually quite reasonable as well. Again, if I recall correctly, I think it does undercut some of the others. Maybe even the Dodge Coronet, I think, might be more expensive. I believe the Challenger also might have been more expensive than this one, so it's 163,000 credits. That might be a bit more affordable because it's only just been added to the game, but they don't necessarily usually do that, so I wouldn't say so. That's pretty reasonable. 160 grand is pretty good for an iconic muscle car. You could always make the argument that, well, it didn't used to be that expensive or whatever else, but in the economy of GT7, I'd say that's a bargain, really. And in terms of the point level, it's not too high, but it's probably higher than you might think for something on old school tyres with a 3-speed transmission, loads of weight, and not exactly the best top-end performance. To have 472 points is fairly hefty, actually, and it means that when you do build it up, certainly with well over 900 horses and the weight dropped out, even without top-tier tyres, it jumps way up on the point level. In fact, if I remember rightly, this particular one that I'm driving here, which, like I said, is fully built, aside from not having racing tyres, was pretty close, if not on 700 points. And on sports tyres, that is very high for a classic road car. Now, of course, this is a naturally aspirated vehicle. You can supercharge it. There's no turbo option, not that you necessarily need it, plus it wouldn't feel entirely authentic for a car like this. You can wide arch kit it. One of the curious things I noticed about the wide arches is that it doesn't look that much wider, but it does delete the chrome from around the arches, so it gives it a bit more of that smoothed off kind of look. Again, kind of goes quite well with that drag rear spoiler. It's a shame actually that you can't do some bonnet upgrades on these older cars. Again, we're getting a bit close to Forza territory there, but having like a hood scoop or a shaker even sticking out of the bonnet would look pretty cool on some of these muscle cars. But Gran Turismo isn't necessarily that kind of game, which is the reason why I think having a drag wing kind of stands out, because we've had some drag cars here and there, but not for a long time. Gran Turismo 2 was pretty much the pinnacle of that with the HKS models. This one, though, is a justified legend to look forward to because it was already a very strong choice of muscle car in the older games. And the fact that the muscle car fanbase doesn't tend to be quite as fervent over the Chevelle as they are for Mustangs, Chargers, Challengers, etc. kind of makes it a bit of an underdog and a bit more of a sleeper. And I feel like in GT7, one of the things that I do like is that this may introduce a younger generation to enjoying something like a Chevy Chevelle, something which you might have been less familiar with or never played the older games, and finally having this big muscular bruiser of a car with that huge engine, well, it's great. It could engender that kind of love for a newer generation, and for some people it could end up being like their version of what older games were for people like me growing up. Many of the cars that I've bought in the past were directly because of Gran Turismo games, so if it encourages people to love a car like this, that's great as far as I'm concerned, especially when stuff like Mustangs, Chargers, etc., they're already pretty well supported supported. You know, people know about those and they like them. The Chevelle, it's definitely an undervalued one, and you can tell how undervalued it is because if you ask most people to name a Chevy, especially in the kind of muscle car world, the vast majority will say Camaro, even though it's a pony car. Whereas the Chevelle is way more of a proper full-size, red-blooded muscle car that a lot of people wouldn't even mention, specifically in the gaming world, and that really is a shame because this car's got a lot to offer. I'm not going to go ahead and say that it's, you know, a cornering missile or some kind of hidden gem that will destroy Bugattis and stuff, of course not, but as far as specifically classic muscle cars go, I would say it's a very good all-round one. The proportions have always been one of my favourite things as well on the Chevelle because it's fairly wide, but it's not overly long. So it feels very planted through corners. It doesn't wallow around anywhere near as much as you would think it would. So for example, if we had, let's say, not to always go back to my own car, but they are pretty good examples, either of the Lincolns that I had, either the Premier or the Continental, those would be swaying like hell through corners, likewise with Cadillacs, and of course they're not muscle cars, they're luxury cars, but even something in more of the traditionally muscle car considered category in racing games, like your Chevy Impala for example, that's going to sway like hell around corners as well. So this one does definitely take corners better than you would think for something that's this big and this heavy. And sometimes that could be all the advantage you need going up against other classics. And every single thing here in the event is from my garage, as you can tell, and they are all running huge amounts of horsepower. So to me, it definitely shows that even on sports tyres, this car has got a lot to give. So if you haven't logged in, I wouldn't necessarily say it's worth, you know, jumping back into GT7 just to drive this one car, but I will say that if you did, and if for some reason you haven't bought it yet, I don't think you'd be disappointed. There's nothing about the car to really be disappointed by. It's just a cool classic. It's an iconic muscle car which should be way more iconic than it is, and yeah, I'm pretty damn happy with it. And for some people it might even be more significant to say that even if you don't like the car, it is of course yet another vehicle from the leaked data mining list. Gradually ticking those off is never a bad thing. So that's it for my thoughts on the Chevelle, definitely the standout overall. Of course I still need to talk about the Skoda and the Afeela, which I will be doing in the next couple of days, so stick around for those and absolutely tell me your thoughts down below. Are you happy with the car? Have you maybe found it particularly useful for something? Maybe a point level? Maybe you do use it as a drag car, for example, and you found it's great? Tell me all about it, and of course, I'll see you next time. But for now, thanks for watching.